Jeff Orlowski, director of The Social Dilemma. I would say this is a cautionary tale about the dangers of social media, but we're already in the thick of it. So first of all, I want to know, what is your history with social media before this? Like, were you an avid user?
Avid, super heavy user, used it all the time. I describe myself as addicted, and that has swung all the way to today where I don't touch it at all. I don't use it. I haven't deleted the accounts because they still provide access to people and connectivity. But as I learned in this project, they don't actually provide connection, really. It's a false sense of connection. But it has been such a huge shift for me personally to remove social media from my daily life.
Mm-hmm. Did you have like a go-to app, or you're just like on all of them?
Facebook. It was Facebook more than anything. Facebook during the 2016 election was like the real thing for me. But it's the algorithms reverse engineered what worked for me, as they do for all of us. And Facebook knew what I was interested in, what I liked, and what I kept going back for. And it put me in my own polarized perspective. It put me in my own filtering, in my own unique. I like to say these aren't public squares. They try to sell themselves as public squares, but you get your own private, personal square, and that is one's social media experience.
Mm-hmm. When did you start getting alarmed by this and like its impact, and when did you decide to make this film?
Yeah. So I went to Stanford University, which is important in that so many of my friends ended up working in tech, and that was a path that I was considering and was potentially going down. And then it was in 2017 where I started hearing from some friends from Stanford a very different perspective on the technology that so many of us loved and admired and adored. And I hadn't heard a counter perspective like that before. I hadn't really heard anybody criticize some of the fundamental design practices of Silicon Valley and of tech. And that was a big shift for me. One of our subjects referenced it as a climate change of culture that is invisibly shaping and changing the way billions of people see and think and understand the world. And so that put us down this path of really wanting to explore and unpackage it.
Mm-hmm. The film is like a docudrama because you have a fictional storyline with this family and the kids who can't stay off their phones, and one of them becomes radicalized. So what went into that decision to include that form of storytelling?
The film really started with back-to-back interviews with all of our insiders that we had met through this process. And that became the backbone of the film. But in the process of speaking to these engineers and experts and designers and executives from these different tech companies, we started to learn and understand just how the algorithms work. I was not familiar with algorithms. I couldn't explain it to you prior to now. But I really learned in that process just what's going on and that's hidden on the other side of your phone. Why do you see the content that you see? Why and when are you receiving notifications? All of these things are being designed and optimized by algorithms that have intended to reverse engineer you in particular. And so as we were learning that, we started coming up with these analogies and trying to understand just how they operate and trying to figure out ways to communicate that to the public. So we were able to take those concepts and basically anthropomorphize and bring to life the algorithms and the intent that different algorithms have that aren't necessarily aligned with your intent and your goals and your objectives. So we felt like we can bring that concept to life through this story and pair that and parallel that to the track of the documentary. And as we were learning about all of the insights from these experts, to reveal that story visually.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you show how an algorithm works because you have Vincent Kartheiser playing 3 AIs. And I thought that was genius because it's like it is this like invisible operation, these like manipulation techniques that these companies use, but we don't know this tech speak. So what was it like working with him to do all that?
It was phenomenal. It was so much fun, and he was absolutely fun on set, and he brought such life and joy to the set in such ways. And I think he did a brilliant job. I was really, really thrilled with our opportunity to really push and demonstrate, look, these aren't humans. This is not like we're using an actor to bring to life the concepts, but really trying to portray algorithms don't have morality. They are unmoral. There is no moral frame. If an algorithm is debating to show you, really healthy food that you should consider eating, or hysterical, outrageous piece of news content that's going to get you to, click on it and read and engage with it, the algorithm is going to figure out what works for you, which might be different than somebody else. And that's the algorithm is not determining, is it true? Is it accurate? Is this good information for you or for society? It's just showing you whatever might be engaging for you at that particular moment. And I think we were able to bring that concept to life. And we've really heard from audiences that they think about the technology in a completely different way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And in that vein, like you have a whole segment on Google and how Google like autocomplete suggestions are different for phrases depending on where you live and your interests. And, we each get like a different set when we type something in. So it's like, what is the truth? So what was the most shocking thing that you learned about all this?
Oh my God, just that would fill hours of conversation. But I think the real thing is this complete gap between what we, the public, know and understand versus how this technology actually operates and how the engineers know what's going on. The point that you're bringing up right there around a Google search, for example, if you're searching for climate change information, you'll get different information based on who you are or what Google thinks about you. That's the example that we bring to light in the film. That applies for practically everything. There's this amazing book called Algorithms of Oppression by Sophia Noble that talks about racial bias embedded in algorithms. So this is something that we need to understand how this technology works, because it's actually just perpetuating problems in our society that we're trying to overcome, and yet is built in subconsciously and unintentionally in many cases. It's built into the technology in the algorithmic design. And in some cases, the actual business model, I think this was the biggest thing that we learned, that fundamentally the entire business model that drives big social, that's Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Snapchat, Google, YouTube, that entire business model has an incentive that, in my understanding now, is misaligned with society's interests. I compare it to the fossil fuel industry. Fossil fuels seemed really great and amazing when we discovered them many years ago, and we could fly and drive and travel farther and faster. And then years later, we recognized, well, wait a second, climate change is a real thing and there are real consequences. And what do we do? And how do we change this entire business model? That's what we're facing right now with our technology. Our technology has turned humans, our digital lives and experiences, into a raw resource for extraction. Like, we are being extracted. We are living in the matrix already. I know that all sounds wild and crazy, but that genuinely has been the process, the mind-blowing process of making this film.
Mm-hmm. Well, this film came out before January 6th, but you guys cover, like all the misinformation and how it spreads online and how these companies are like maybe not happy, but they're just like passively allowing like outrage and misinformation to spread online. So I was wondering, like, what was your reaction on the attack on the Capitol? Because that was, a result of really, like the voter fraud claims spreading on social media.
Right. I think many of our subjects were vocal around saying that they were not surprised by January 6th. And I think the work on this film in many ways prepared me for events like that to happen, which, by the way, are happening in other countries consistently. We might just not hear about them as much. But the polarization that we sense and we feel in many ways, my takeaway from this film and from this research over the last few years is that these types of technologies, these types of big social technologies with these incentives that currently exist, that they are fundamentally incompatible with a free democracy, that there's such tension and conflict between how they operate. And my biggest concern and fear is what this means moving forward. We're only 10 years into this experiment of big social puppeteering information around the planet. And what are the consequences of another decade of this experiment? And that's why I think the tech activist community is so inspired to take action as fast as possible.
Mm-hmm. Well, you talk to a lot of former executives and employees at these companies in the film, and a lot of them feel remorseful about what has happened and that they were part of these companies. But did you reach out to Mark Zuckerberg at all?
We did not actually reach out directly to Zuckerberg. I feel like in many cases, Facebook's perspective and opinion has been very publicized for years and years. So what we were looking for through this process was the untold part of the story through employees and executives and others that work there that haven't been in the limelight.
Mm-hmm. What would you ask Mark Zuckerberg if you could talk to him?
I've had that conversation in my head many times, and I don't know what I might ask today. It's varied between, do you think it's all worth it? Or how long is it going to take to get through his denial around the consequences? I mean, I do feel a lot of empathy for him. Similar to that fossil fuel analogy I used earlier. Imagine spending your entire adult life building, that's like his first job, really, right? Like spending your entire adult life after college working on building something that for years and years you just think is like a massive positive contribution to society. And you become rich and famous in the process, and you, right, all of that grows and expands around you. And then you start to realize that there are flaws with the fundamental design. I think everything in Mark's mindset right now, obviously, having not spoken to him, this is all projection, but everything that we've seen has been sort of recovery mode. It seems to be, you know, balancing PR and wanting to keep a positive spin on everything, but not fundamentally addressing the core challenge of their fundamental design and structure. And I think that's what we were trying to say, that fundamentally the entire business model is toxic.
Mm-hmm. Over the credits, you have, you know, a montage of like all these people talking about like ways we can try to fix this, the need for regulation. So are you hopeful that that can happen?
I am very hopeful about it. And in fact, I'm more optimistic about it than ever. We are seeing massive movement in the United States and in Europe and in the EU, trying to move towards regulation, bipartisan interest in regulating big social and the tech industry. I think the conversations from just a couple of years ago compared to the Senate hearings from March and just a couple of weeks ago, there's a completely different tone from the United States Congress and Senate around what responsibility the tech companies hold. Critiques of the business model, knowledgeable awareness of the impacts on youth and mental health. And so we're seeing a huge shift compared to a couple of years ago. So I think there's still a long distance to go. And I think, you know, there's still challenge of what should that regulation look like, but it's happening. That conversation is happening often now.
Well, Jeff, it was great speaking with you. Thanks so much.
Yeah, thank you, Jared.